Okay, welcome, ladies and gentlemen, if that's what you are still allowed to be called. You lot anyway. Meeting's about to start. We're going live. I'm sure Christine or somebody will test it after 5 minutes, because the last meeting, my best jokes are not recorded because the sound was off. And no matter how they tried, I think, well, you did that last time, it still didn't work, did it? So just hopefully we got the sound on this one, so when they come to do the minutes, like I do, replay things, make sure, did I say that? Did they say that? We can get that correct. I haven't actually told the officers this, but I would like us to stand for a minute's silence for the passing of Wendy Johnson. I did know Wendy way back at Age UK, and then she worked for Tamworth Borough Council, and she worked for Lichfield District. She also did volunteer work at the Lichfield Garrick Theatre. So if that's okay, I'm not sure there's ever been an officer before, but dying in these circumstances in office, as it were, for Wendy, I would like us, as part of the governance team, to stand just for a moment and think about that. Is that okay? Please, thank you. Yeah, I'll be saying more at full council, I'm sure, as well. So first item is apologies for absence. We've got
Chair, we have apologies from councillors Ball and Booker.
that's it. Councillor Ball is on the Danube, hopefully still. And I don't think he's going to get Wi-Fi easily, but he has sent in a couple of comments, which I'll refer to later in the reports. Any declarations of interest is item 2 on the agenda that people may have or may think they have. If not, obviously there's always an opportunity later on if you suddenly think, oh yes, that does apply to me. Okay, thank you. Minutes of the previous meeting are there, not for discussion but for approval, and we're doing this before the next full council, aren't we? So not unusual that, but are there anybody willing to move those as a correct record? Moving as a correct record. Question, Dave.
Thank you, Chair. Just in relation to point 14, the local elections review, it's good to see that there's a mention in there about the clear trend there was about the average age of award and its change in turnout this time. There was a second point that I made specifically around the SPI we have around access to information. Wards with lower access to information saw their turnout drop, whereas wards with a higher score there. So I think that should be reflected in the minutes if we can.
Would that be okay with everybody?
Would that be okay with everybody? You did make those comments. I know some fell asleep because it was quite a long. Because David is into statistics and he went into a lot of detail. So he
on that one.
Brad beat us into yeah. So that's not there. So you look at it because it's not to wait till full council. And with those, Susan.
Yeah, Chair, subject to that amendment, I'll move.
Good, thank you. That agreed? Thank you. Now then, there are two items. There should have been 2 items on this agenda, but there's, I would say, down to capacity, they're not on here, but they're not on the agenda anyway. But if you look in the work programme later on, you'll see that they should have been. Anyway, we'll get those in a future meeting. The other issue is that the cabinet member for leisure parks and plays waste, or no, he's not. Andy Smith, who will be responding to the member calling that Sue has asked for, will not be able to be here because he's in a different country. So the leader of the council, Doug Pullen, is going to be in his place, but Doug Pullen's got something on, important family issue, and he'll be hoping to be here for 6:30. So, with your indulgence, if that's okay, if I can move on to health matters, and then maybe a review of the civic function before we get to that item. Is that okay? Yeah. And if I can ask Leona, if you've got anything to say, the Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. There was only one meeting since the last health. Unfortunately, I had to send my apologies as I was very unwell. However, I have been updated that the flu vaccine based on age group is now available from the age of 75 onwards, and different age group will be available as time goes by. So residents will be contacted, so there's no need for residents to contact GPs. The item covered in the meeting on Monday was about mental health draft action and strategic plan. The really good news is that it's expanding to focus on young people as well as adults. And they're looking at various sectors such as gender, marriage, social media. So it's not just about mental health, but lots of very specific sectors in the mental health section. Looking to promote to how we can keep others mentally and physically fit, minimize medicine, how can we solve this long term, and connecting people better where they can get better information and support groups is easily accessible. They also look to increase the proportion of people with, increase access to have full annual health checks for those who have severe mental illness and access to paid work, which is really good news at the same time. And then further to the last meeting ONS we had, there are a few items which was raised, so I have some answers to those. I'll just get those out. So we spoke of in our last meeting that there are more new developments in the area where more GP surgeries are desired with more increased population. And of course, we were thinking about ICS, can it assist or not? So how ICS, Integrated Care System, they are a consultee to planning applications. However, they can't, they would know how many patients are registered as well. But how primary care practices is like a business where they would increase their numbers because that's more popular to them, or they are part of a network, which could also help patients divert. If one GP surgery do not have spaces available, they would have the next closest one or those within their group. So if those in the new developments or areas which have more housing require access to GPs, then the medical network should be assisting with that as well. But of course, for GP surgery or primary care surgeries, for them to turn down patients, it shouldn't be like that. It wouldn't be positive for them because again, it's based on their income as well. In terms of ICB and S106, in terms of them, the pots of money, they don't, I've been informed, they don't have a pot of money to support, but more of a estate strategy in terms of the ownership of the premises. So for example, they would be helping those in terms of infrastructure, leisure centres and GPs, but of course, new developments, everyone is asking for the pots of money. So where ICB needs it, where they see it's more important, that's where it would be allocated. And then there was the query in regards raised by members from Samuel Johnson Midwives Centre in regards to the closure of the birth centre. So where it was informed that expecting mothers would be travelling much further in terms of birth. So it has been formed, well, Samuel Johnson has been closed since the start of the pandemic, and they do intend to temporarily close due to operational safety, such as shortage of staff, and then also there have been a few issues in other cities with potential services such as health and for example. So they are quite reluctant to open for time being, mainly due to reason of the shortage of staff since the pandemic. However, there is a county ONS health meeting in November, which I will be pushing for the Samuel Johnson and update of what we can do to have it open and not permanently closed. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you for all those updates and following those things up. Are there any questions? Sue, please. Councillor Woodward.
It's not so much a comment as a question as a comment, and I just want to thank the Vice Chair for that really full feedback report, which is really helpful. Having been concerned looking at the health scrutiny work plan at the previous meeting, I just thought, and I think the comment was made then, that these are often reports directly from providers and trusts, which are sort of giving their view of you know, how their services are panning out. But there wasn't, it seemed, an opportunity to get very local views. You know, we've had a number of issues recently around GP capacity in Lichfield and certain GP capacity and the closure of the surgery in Burntwood. And taking that on board, and I'm sorry I haven't consulted with you yet, Vice Chair, but hopefully there will be consultation. I proposed and submitted to Will and the Chairman a suggestion for a task group on local health priorities, because there are often issues which bubble up completely sort of unexpectedly, and we need to have some sort of direct path, if you like, to inform you in order for you to be able to relay local views at the county council, but you know, sort of direct line through to the integrated care board. I don't know what the situation is in relation to that task group, but the intention is for that to be helpful for local members to feed in their own electors' concerns as they may happen at a very local level. So we'll be getting an update on that at some point, I would hope. Thank you.
Yes, we'll update you on when we get to agenda on item 9 of the work programme. So I'll refer that. Dave, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you, Chair. If I can mirror both of those 2 points, I think it's really refreshing to see such a detailed report, and then genuinely thank Councillor Leon for that. But I think, yeah, having a response that it's more financially advantageous for surgeries to not open new surgeries, I think will not be a welcome piece of news for many of our constituents. So having some democratic oversight, having some direct contact, I think would be really positive on that front.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, please, yes.
Yeah, I agree. I raised the point where that we do need more GP surgeries in the local area. I have been informed, unfortunately, you know, that most of the buildings are owned by the primary care and they run it as well. So it would be really, it's more advantage for the council or to own the building. So rather than being privately owned and therefore it's less of a business, but more for the local people.
Okay. Councillor Ho, yes.
Thanks, Chair. It was mentioned about GP capacity, and obviously capacity leads to waiting lists and how long these waiting lists are. Today I read a very interesting article on a NHS physio who managed to cut their waiting lists by a third by hiring a leisure centre for a couple of days and having a community booking, so everyone on their waiting list could come and do that. And that's something that this district council could look at doing in partnership with the county council and health services, because obviously we run the leisure centres locally as well. So perhaps that's something that the Vice Chair can feed back to the county, and that cabinet members present today can feed back to leadership as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And just one thing to say, I'm not 75, but in fact I had a text yesterday from my practice for the COVID and flu jabs, and I replied today and it's all sorted. So one practice is ahead of the rest of the time. Okay, so thank you very much again for that report and the questions there and comments. Right. Move on to the next item then. Well, that's to say the next item I will choose, which is not notes from task group, because we haven't got those because they've only been met recently and they've got to go through the chairs to check and the other officers to check that they're correct before we can share those. So that's not quite here. We've gone to the review of the civic function matrix, and I presume Kerry Dove will come forward and be prepared to answer questions. You just introduce yourself actually as well, just very brief, because I made that mistake at the last meeting where members wouldn't know who this person or that person is and so on. So if you and Christine could do that, that'd be great.
Thank you, Chair. Kerry Dove, I'm Chief Operating Officer here at Lichfield District Council. I'm really ably assisted in this event item by Christine. So, hello Chair and hello committee. Yes, it's Christine Lewis, the Principal Governance Officer.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you want to say a few words on the report? We've got the report. I always expect members to have read it. And I know you're asking a few questions. That is to say, your views requested on page 16 and views requested on page 17. Although I didn't quite understand the last bullet point one there. I'll read it out, which is views are requested as to whether the civic allowance should be proportioned with limits on what can be spent on personal items such as clothing. Although I think I might have worked it out over time, but you can clarify those views that you would like back. And of course, we've got the recommendations on the first page, which don't ask us to note anything, ask us to do something, and hopefully we'll feedback on that comment. You just help me with those views requested, why you're asking them, and then
Yes, no, absolutely. Thank you, Chair. So yes, we're bringing this paper this evening to see the committee's views and feedback on two key elements: the civic scoring matrix and also civic allowances. So starting with scoring matrix, obviously the paper covers the background and the purpose of the civic scoring matrix that was developed by a member task group back in 2015. So the aim of that matrix is to help standardise and aid decision making on what invitations should be accepted by the chair of the council and the vice chair. The matrix is provided in Appendix A, and a list of invitations that were accepted during the previous year has also been provided in Appendix B. At the time of the task group and the scoring matrix was first developed, it was felt that the civic allowance, so the public purse, shouldn't be used as a fundraising source. Therefore, the matrix doesn't really consider kind of charity and community group invitations. However, understandably, over recent years and with the impacts of the pandemic, we have seen more invitations from charities and community groups. So we're particularly seeking views on the committee's views on potentially editing the matrix to include charity events, and also consider, if the committee is in agreement with that, including charity events outside of the district, so events that are held not within the district, but that charity does work in our district area. The other specific element around the scoring matrix that we're very keen to hear the committee's views is, as you'll see in the scoring matrix, there is an amber section, and when an invitation falls in the amber section, the civic officer seeks approval by the leader or the chief exec as to whether that invitation should be accepted. And we're particularly interested in hearing views on whether it would be useful to delegate this to other officers, for example, the monitoring officer. So those are some specific questions we've got on the scoring matrix. In terms of the civic allowance, the paper goes through some of the background to recommendations that the Independent Remuneration Panel made back in June 22. Obviously, the civic allowance is there to kind of meet out-of-pocket expenses that arise during the course of their duties, and the types of expenses that are incurred are kind of outlined in paragraph 3.9. The IRP did recommend amalgamating the chair and vice chair's allowance to allow flexibility in case of a situation where a vice chair has to potentially undertake more duties than initially anticipated. This wasn't agreed at the time the IRP recommendations were taken to full council, but again we thought it was helpful to get the committee's views as to whether this is still the opinion. IRP also recommended that clarity be sought on how the civic allowance could be spent, and in particular kind of personal items such as clothing. So the view and the question we're asking is, currently the civic allowance is just one budget. Should we seek to proportion out that budget and place specific limits on specific types of spend? And again, really interested to hear the committee's views on that as well. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any questions? First of all, I've got 3 names down here from yesterday. Brian, Phil and Colin. So if you want to ask any questions now or raise any issues. No? Any questions on this at this stage?
Yes, just a question. Thanks. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
But first of all, is it part of the constitution of the council that we must have a chairman? Is that something we must have?
Ask the deputy monitoring officer to answer that one.
Oh, can you turn the mic off? Sorry. Thank you, Chair. So the only kind of duty, what I would call the legal duty, is we must have a chair to chair council meetings. So civic events, there is no legislation to say that there should be, but it is a very much a traditional thing that all councils of all levels will have mayors or chairs, that they act almost like the speaker but on a local level, but they do also these events.
Okay, thank you for that. And on that basis, have we done any comparison with other similar councils to see what they're currently doing and what is best practice out there, rather than perhaps us think that we know? Have we actually looked at really what works really well for other places?
Are you happy for me to take this one as well? Not recently. I think we did do something with that original task group. The reality is we were probably the first ones to conduct such a review at the time, and what we found is some, not all, but some have actually followed us to reduce and kind of standardise, but we haven't looked recently.
So would that be a good opportunity then to do that comparison going forward?
I think that is something for yourselves as the committee to decide whether it's something you wish to do and instruct us.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for those questions. The questions, those, if I may say so, especially the first one. That was a googly. Hopefully you got the answer right. I mean, we'll all go back.
I'm pretty sure.
Well, certainly if you're a borough, you have a mayor.
Yeah.
And I think that's is essential there. But yeah, I mean, we could look at more recently. I do get the impression, my own experience, I do get the impression that we all looked at the budgets again because of the effect on local government of finance and COVID and that, and we want a review of what we do as councils, including, by the way, outside bodies many years ago, where there were an awful lot of outside bodies. Let's go through the list and see which ones are worth still continuing. What do we get? And, you find some that actually aren't functioning now. I'm not saying there's none of these councils that visited aren't functioning, but it's useful to see what things. It might be used to get up to date, but I think we want to try and get a response this evening. I think on that there'll be another review later on, or to learn from anything. I'll bring in Brian next, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Well, you mentioned when you get an amber, and you have to go double check that to the leader. I think that should be left with your department to do that, because you're handling the day-to-day of the invitation. And if you've been doing it for a long time, you'll be familiar with the people who are making the invites, or whether you think that would be suitable for the chair to go there. I think that makes sense, and then we'll move it quicker. If you're having to try and contact someone who's not available, you can lose a day doing it, where you could go through that and you will hopefully make the right decision. Otherwise, you're back in front of it. Thank you, Chair.
I think that's in place of involving the leader and the or the chief officer, chief executive. Yeah. Sue, I'll take next, although I've got Colin on the list.
Thanks, Chair. Having been a member of the task group before, we did a lot of work in terms of comparing and contrasting, and you know, the huge variety of expenditure on that sort of civic function from one authority to another. The idea of this civic function scoring matrix was agreed by the whole council at that point, because we felt that there are certain events which would bring added value for the council, and other events which didn't bring a great deal of value. It seems to me, though, looking at the civic function matrix and the list of events that we've had in Appendix B, that a lot of those in the red area, which are, if you like, the civic circuit, the chain gang, as they're called, and the traditional event, a lot of those are still happening. So, you know, civic balls and civic services and so on across the whole region, it seems, which are traditional events, but I can't see bring a great deal of added value, particularly for, you know, the lives of our council taxpayers. So I'd just like your comments on how effective that matrix has been. The traditional civic chain gang events still creeping. And while it says no charge on Appendix B for a lot of these events, some of them are chargeable, so 45 quid for a do. The chairman plus the chairman's consort, so that's 90 quid before the start, and additional costs for transport and so on. So, you know, I've got no idea. I can't answer about specific limits on budgets because we need more detail about what the budgets are and how they've been expended in the past. But it seems that although no charge is listed there, there are significant costs to transporting an individual or two individuals to these events. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, some on the civic circuit line on the scoring matrix, there are some elements that would fall in the amber. So they would potentially have been invitations that might have gone to the leader or chief exec for a final decision. And like I say, I think you know, we'd have to do some unpicking on the context and the detail behind each of them. I'd also say there is a degree of personal responsibility on the chair and the vice chair as part of this process as well, in terms of them, you know, obviously we briefed them on the scoring matrix, but again, I think there is a bit of responsibility on them to ensure that they are also doing that check and balance in terms of these invitations as well.
Okay.
Can I just ask, what is the total allowance for the chairman and the vice chairman? Oh, yeah, give us that.
Just in the financial implications, the actual.
So Christina's just said it's in that financial very much. So the chair's allowance for 23-24 is 2,120, and the vice chair's allowance is set at 1,070.
Okay. I'll just bring in Colin, as it were, from the Danube, which is that he has concerns about the attendance at events outside the district that incur a cost. I've touched upon that. And he's not sure that he understands the value of paying for non-charity events outside the district. He would support the amalgamating of allowances into one pot and limiting spend on personal items such as clothing. Let's put those in. Do you want to respond to that at all, or have any issues with that? Or
No,
okay.
Thank you.
So Tim, on my list then is David and Dave Robertson, Kath Robertson, and Councillor Miles.
Thank you, Chair. My starting point on this was coming back to a meeting of this committee possibly about 18 months ago, when Councillor Strachan brought a paper with a long list of potential savings that they were looking at. One of the savings in there was around £3,000 on deleting the civic function, which we know every time we do the budget consultation, people say, why are we spending money on this? And actually, it was on that list of potential savings. It was actually commended by this committee that it would be a good thing to remove that because of the regular consultation responses we get saying, why are we doing this? Yet somehow it wasn't called. And it's not, £3,000 is not going to be what makes and breaks this council. It's millions of pounds that we spend over a year. But I think there is a really important kind of oversight here that newer members who weren't on this committee a couple of years ago, and I'm looking around, there's not many of us who are still here, wouldn't have that context, and that is absolutely something that's there. So my view when I'm looking at this is very much coloured by that. And I think particularly when I look at the matrix that's in front of us here, it's wrong. So there are two values in here, both of which are 6. One is coloured yellow, one is coloured green. I don't know what would happen in that situation. So if it's within the LDC boundary and it's a community event, that has to be checked with the leader. But if it supports LDC strategic initiatives and is civic hosting, it's got the same score, but that doesn't have to be checked with the leader. And then the bottom right corner, I don't know what's going on with 15 and 16, because they may go to the leader, they may be ruled out. It's unclear from here exactly how that's working. And that's a real problem for me, because clearly when this has been set up, it's been set up wrong. To follow some of Councillor Woodward's points, I actually recognise a couple of the events that were attended this year as being organised by a council that I am the leader of. The press weren't in attendance, and I cannot see how attending the mayor making would support LDC strategic initiatives. So it's not functioning as it currently is. And I think we've got this massive problem that our residents don't want us to spend money on this, and it's not currently functioning. So I think that in the absence of us being able to say here, cancel the civic function, which is not what the purpose of this paper is, I think we do need to look at this and say, one of the aims that we should be seeking to achieve is A, reducing the number of events that are happening to reduce the overall spend, and B, making sure that we have something to replace this matrix, because as it currently is, it's wrong. And particularly if you look at press in attendance, since the Mercury's gone, there's no local press in Burntwood. Actually, if the press in attendance is effectively going to be all but an automatic, that's a civic function, we can go to it, we're going to end up with more civic functions in Tamworth where there's the Herald and Cannock where there's the Chronicle than we are in our own district, because we don't have any local press in our district outside of an internet site where they don't have reporters going in and out because it's run by volunteers, or City Life where again they don't have reporters going out, it's referred in. So one of the things that I would like to see here is getting rid of this matrix, because I don't think it functions, and replace it with a scoring system. So actually we can include, is the press going to be attendance at a point? We can include, does it support LDC strategic initiatives and the strategic plan at 10 points? We can say, is it within the LDC boundary or is it not, -2 points? And I think doing that and then setting a set of criteria, a set of numbers which would be available, and then saying that if a civic function scores higher than 12, 14, 9, 7.3, whatever number we set it at, then that's, and I think that's going to be a much clearer situation. So we're not relying on that discretion and that kind of checking up on yourself, because actually sometimes you get an invitation and you go, oh, yeah, okay, I'll go to that, don't let anybody down. And sometimes you send stuff through to a leader and it's email number 742 of the day, and it's just like, yeah, cool, go ahead with that. And I think actually having that hard and fast, this is okay, this is where the points are coming from, this is how we're scoring this, go ahead with it, is going to be much simpler. It's going to eliminate some of the errors that we've got with the current system that's happening, and we will through that be able to reduce the number of civic events and reduce that spend, as our residents have told us to time after time after time.
What if I can help Kerry when Dave switches his light off?
Sorry.
You of course weren't here when the Matrix was, Councillor Woodward was here, but you weren't here when the Matrix when the Matrix was designed. What is your response apart from? Oh.
This is why we've come tonight.
Of course, that was a good answer.
Your views are both scoring matrices. Yeah, if the committee's feedback is it's not fit for purpose and we think it can be improved, then let's absolutely have a look at that. And it might be that you want to consider, Chair, a one-off task group meeting to actually get into some of the detail of this, and again, have a look at what others are doing and look at how we can redesign this.
We could probably manage that pending another task group starting, I think, possibly, but it'd be a one-off meeting. Yeah. There's a list here, and Councillor Miles Trent is next. I've got Richard after that.
Thank you, Chair. I'm quite pleased to hear some of the previous speakers because I was thinking I'm going to sound like a killjoy here. But, because there's a lot of these events that no doubt have their traditional value, but I have exactly the same feeling coming to this as Councillor Woodward was describing, that the factors that are on this matrix might be appropriate, and yet when I look at the list of things that they've gone to, I'm scratching my head thinking, well, how have they passed this matrix? So I do. My impression of it was there's an awful lot on there that seems to be a traditional event, that seems to be more towards the social side. So it is more about how it's being executed, perhaps, than whether they've got the right factors there. I wondered about the question of consorts attending as well, just to make me really sound like a killjoy. It might be that it doesn't have any real expense because it's a non-ticketed event and there's going to be one person in the car anyway. It doesn't have much expense, but that just leaps out of me as, you know, my wife doesn't go with me to strategic work events. So, just to put it in that context.
These do have a social context. If you're
Yes, but
dancing or, you
But
know,
we're talking about the value it's having for the residents at the end of the day.
I'm just trying to be helpful with the concept.
Yeah, okay. In terms of the level that it needs to be cleared at, obviously want to make sure the right decisions are taken at the right level, and it sounded to me potentially as a bit over the top for it to need to be cleared at leader or chief exec level. So I agree with previous speakers that perhaps it can be done at a lower level, but if there's a particularly tricky one, of course there'd be the option to put it up the chain. But yeah, I agree with that previous comment as well. I agree also with the idea of a scoring system perhaps being more sensible. But yeah, those are my impressions. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. I respond to any of those. I mean, I think a task group is going to be the best way forward, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can include the question around consort as part of that as well.
We'll get lobbied in between. No. Richard, please. What? Oh no, I'm in charge. Yeah, mine doesn't cut you off enough.
Thank you, Chair. The budget for the chair's allowance, £2,120. What's that figure based on?
It's based on 1974, and you've increased it every year since then.
We'll take that question away and get back.
Okay, so
Somebody's going to look at something.
okay. So in addition to that, I also understand there's a pot of money. In addition to that, for expenses, is that correct, or is that not correct?
No, this is, I think, the expense. You get your SRA, your special responsibility allowance, which is separate to what's in those financial implications. And from what I can tell, this is the expenses.
Yes.
Right, okay. So double bubble then, basically. So
No. So, and this is where try not to sound complicated. So everybody that has what we call a special responsibility, including chairs of committees, cabinet members, that is recognised that you have to put extra hours in, extra work, you may be using extra resources, but for the chair and vice chair, it is recognised that you may have to buy tickets to events that committee chairs don't have to. There may be requirements because of the sorts of events that clothing would be required. So that's what this expense allowance is for, not to recognise the special responsibility that you do over other members.
brilliant. Okay, so with that being the case, would it not be more sensible, in addition to the point system, which I think has, complete merit, it makes more sense to me. Would it not be an idea to essentially ring fence that money rather than say this is the allowance and do what you like with it and then claim it's expenses, or is that how it works already?
Sorry, can you clarify?
But they have to show that this is the expenses that carry with involved. incurred, wasn't it?
You still do. So if you are, sorry, no, it's fine.
If I understood Richard right, I made my
If
brain
you
up.
are to claim against this expenses allowance, e.g. clothing, then yes, you do have to show receipts, etc. So this is kind of a drill down. Your special responsibility allowance, you get anyway, the same as cabinet members, chairs, etc. But for this, say if you were to get clothing, you do still have to show receipts for us to authorise actually that payment back.
Okay. And is that published anywhere? So people have access to it?
I'm 80% sure, I'm pretty sure it is, but I will double check, and that's something if we are going to do a task group, I'll bring back and make sure it's minuted.
Okay, so I think for the purpose of transparency, that would be quite helpful. Other than that, I think the point system makes absolute sense.
Anytime me and you agree, it must be a good idea. Go back to rowing on Twitter later.
I think there's a reference to the freedom of information requests in the past. I don't know whether that's been about clothes or anything like that, but anybody can put that request in, and I think we'd be duty bound to respond to that one. I don't think we could get out of that one. But yeah, I understand that point. Well, look, I mean, I think we've touched on all the bullet points, the views requested, but if we do have this one-off, and I say one-off task group to go into more detail on that, and perhaps invite one or two previous chairs in as well, because they know the experience of that. I mean, it's all right as sitting here. I've been chair of the town council for 1 year. It was like somebody's tell how to do it, because it's quite an onerous task really. Smiling at everybody, having small talk, and you know, not able to relax if you're a chair. I don't think at these events, because you are representing the district or the parish, whatever. And so it'd be useful to get a view from the members who've actually done that on behalf of the council as well in that task group, but we'll sort that out. So if that's okay, and we'll hopefully bring it back to the next meeting, we should be able to do that, I think. Well, we'll see on the capacity of that. I know there's no rush on this, but we'd like to get it sorted, so is that all right? So I appreciate the questions, some really good questions. I'll say that, not patronisingly, there are some really good ones, like fundamental ones, and that's one of the great things about new councillors. They come up with good fundamental questions we never thought we'd ask ourselves. That's good.
Cheers.
I appreciate. No, I was going on to say it didn't surprise me that Councillor Robertson would demolish the matrix. Not because I saw a problem with it, because I like the colours. You know, I just about the colours. Okay, well, thank you for that, both of you there on that.
Yes, no, thank you for your views.
Okay, thanks. We'll get back to that as soon as we can. Now, is that agreed with everybody? Okay. Yeah, thank you. You can't all be on a task group, by the way. Or to narrow it down. Right, the leader is in the back there, and so if we can ask him to come forward, and we'll deal with a call in now, which is item number 4. He was predicting a while on the civic function. He was right, so we didn't have to plan now. Then we'll get back to the item 4 on the agenda.
Chair, sorry to interrupt. Just before we start, I just wanted to declare an interest. I am a director of the Blackco company, and I'm just here supporting the leader for any kind of process questions.
No, answer that. Thank you. We've got recorded, of course. No, what I think should have happened on here, we should have had the reason for the call in. That's to say, the arguments for the call in on the point. So I'll read them out, which is what Councillor Woodward did say in her email. I wish to call this decision in on the basis that we have not been told of the rationale behind the decision, and on the basis of the new post-May political landscape, it appears that no alternative nominees have been considered. They have certainly not been discussed with opposition group leaders. So that's the reason for the call in. So I'll ask Sue first of all to actually speak on this, and then take it from there. Actually.
Thanks, Chair. This is a relatively minor and sort of quite niche issue to call in, but I think there's a principle at stake here. There was no prior discussion, which I think both the leader and Councillor Smith accept could and should have gone on. And we're now a very different council from the one that was here before May. So just a straightforward appointment of like for like, if you like, the former cabinet member in a particular post being replaced by the new cabinet member in that same post. It doesn't quite reflect the new council. This is no detriment to Councillor Farrell, who was the nominee. I'm sure you can do very well, but you know, just conscious of the fact that more and more business is now being undertaken by the LATCO, and although we've got the chief executive and the chief operating officer there as directors, there's only one councillor amongst the directors, and I think it might be possible to engage more either backbench Conservative members or some opposition members in the working of the LATCO if alternatives were considered. Although it says there on page 9 of my agenda, the covering report, it says the alternative options are do not appoint or appoint another person. I think there are other alternatives, because in 3.2 in the covering report, where it says background, it says that the council can appoint not less than 3 and no more than 7. So there's some flexibility there in terms of nominees that could be taken forward. I just think that the decision as laid out was sort of reactive rather than proactively thinking about what's going to be best for the council taxpayers and for the LATCO for the future. So what I wanted to do was ask Councillor Smith and the leader just consider the different political landscape now of no overall control. Consider whether a backbench or opposition member might be appropriate in order to increase engagement for those councillors. Perhaps alongside a cabinet member. That would be up to the leader and deputy leader to decide. But I think it might be time to consider increasing the number of directors who are members on the LATCO. Could even be an independent member from someone, a resident who would volunteer. But there's just an opportunity, I think, now to reconsider this in view of the LATCO's increase in influence on the services and the services we deliver. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Before I've been looking for initial response, can I just say that I've done quite a bit of reading about this, obviously since it was called in, and there is a view that there shouldn't be any councillors at all on there, and sometimes even senior officers in a local authority. Unquote Grant Thornton in 2018. It is important to manage tensions between members who focus on electrical, focus on electoral cycles, and officers who need to consider longer term sustainability. And very few companies have been dissolved, and in most cases, when this has happened, it has been due to the politics rather than the viability of business. So it might even be that we don't have any councils on there at all. And I do note that also that this year the governance consideration looked at by the Audit Standards Committee in April has confirmed that there'll be the internal audit will confirmed that this will be included in the 2023-2024 audit planning process. So there is a monitoring role there that is going to be going on. But I did find it interesting that if you did a look at the local authorities to see what they did, it's very difficult to find any information about the membership of any local authority organisation company there. I don't know why that is, but difficult then to compare one with the other and see how they were going. But there's a lot of information out there from gov.uk as well, of course. But so I say there's another side to it. If you have more councillors or fewer councillors or no councillors. So there you are, leader. Oh, by the way, the leader's here in place of Andy Smith, as I said earlier on. So appreciate you coming along. Yeah, thanks.
Not at all. Thank you. Well, thank you for putting me slightly later on the agenda so I could go and eat McDonald's Happy Meals with my son for his birthday.
Other restaurants are available.
The restaurants are available, indeed. If only they were. So yeah, I think I understand that the challenges that have been put forward. I think my overriding sort of objective in terms of the councillor appointment, to if we accept that a councillor were going to be appointed to the board, and accepting chair's point there, it might not need to be. Having a councillor on board of the LATCO is important for me to ensure that the aims and objectives of the LATCO don't veer too far wildly from the aims and objectives of the council. It's really important to me that whilst we are putting more and more activities into the LATCO, that we don't suddenly go too far so that the LATCO creates a mind of its own, as it were, and actually suddenly we lose a lot of that control. And I think that's really important. We not just the cabinet, but the Conservative group and right across this council have a very clear view of where we want to go. Sometimes those aren't always aligned, but I think a lot of the time they are. And it's really important, for me at least, that we have a strong sort of grip on that to make sure that that code doesn't, as I say, sort of veer too wildly away from the aims and objectives of the council. Pointing out that Councillor whilst fully accepting that we are in a slightly different position now than perhaps we were before the elections, but that doesn't change the element of the constitution that Councillor Smith acted entirely correctly in what he did there. I think there's some good questions about actually do we need councillors? I would say yes, but perhaps there's an argument that says no. The guidance that we got from 2023 from government was that actually boards of mixed councillors and officers actually work well, and it gives the right sort of I suppose creates the right tensions as well, but creative tensions. In terms of how we influence the LATCO, we obviously have a business plan which is signed off by cabinet on an annual basis, and if any material change to that business plan is going to be taken forward, that needs to come back to cabinet. And I think that certainly for the future, in terms of a learning of how we might work cross-party for that, perhaps that's one of the elements that we need to make sure that we're speaking right across the council to make sure that we continue to be aligned with the aims and objectives of the council. I think just for now, I'll stop after this point and then perhaps have a wider discussion. But our internal audit team are going to be taking a look at the governance process of the LATCO Q3, Q4 financial year. So Q1 of next year. We're going to be looking at that in terms of just, is that working? And people hopefully will know this, that I'm a massive proponent of getting on and getting stuff done. Doesn't mean that we've got it perfect straight away, and if we need to tweak it and make amendments, I'm absolutely fine with that and really open to that. Don't ever pretend that we get everything right first time. But I suppose as the council would say, it's recognising that we've got 47 councillors on this council, and that code does need to be enacting the will of the council as a whole, not just one cabinet member. But I think under our current governance arrangements that works, but obviously we're always open to new suggestions.
Chair, can I
If
just
you want, yeah, come
make
back to
a
Robin's
point of
one, yeah.
personal explanation?
Oh, yeah.
You know, I absolutely accept that Councillor Smith was entitled under delegated powers to make this decision. But can I make clear as well, I'm also entitled to call that decision in for this sort of debate. So I just need to make that clear so that people don't think this was a decision that wasn't for calling. It is, and I think it's the principle really we need to look at. So I'm grateful for the leader's answers. Thanks.
Did you want to come in, Richard, now or not?
No.
No, it's okay. Dave, please, the next one. Dave Roberts.
So I'm going to take the unusual and occasionally fatal option of disagreeing with Sue slightly. Is actually, I think this is the right decision to call in at the right time, because as LWMTS will grow and will continue to develop and hopefully finally get something done with the bomb site outside, there's going to be an element of drawing in private sector investment. I don't know, it's conversations I've had with a few people around this table and other councillors and people outside of the chamber, is one of the most disastrous things that we could have happen is have a proposal for private investment come before council and the vote be lost. Because if a vote is lost in that chamber, it can't come back for 6 months, and all that does is add uncertainty, and we will see that private sector investment just dry up because businesses will not want to deal with us if there's no certainty and we're not able to do it. And actually, I think by potentially looking at this and making sure that we move forwards, and I will come to something a little more specific in terms of the way I think we can try and prevent that. I think if we can get the membership of the board absolutely bang on, then any time that board needs to come to us with recommendations for council, if we can make sure that the recommendations that are coming in are right, we're going to hopefully forestall that risk of things potentially going wrong at council and seeing that difficulty with private investment. So I would rather deal with it at this really technical stage before it becomes to that one potentially later down the line where potentially something could go wrong and it could be potentially ruinous for projects. So as I look at this, we're allowed up to 7 directors on the board of this, and I think it's absolutely right that we've kept a few vacancies currently, because we may in the fullness of time be looking to appoint people and potentially be looking to appoint them to directorships, etc., etc. In my head, looking at 7, I actually think the best makeup that we could make out of 7 would be 2 officers from the council, 2 councillors from the council, and then 3 people who are just directors of the company. So the largest group within that are people who are just focused on making sure that the company is working. But actually, people from the council, officers of the council and councillors, do have that slightly larger majority. And actually within that, we can also then make sure we've got a controlling group member and an opposition group member, so that when things are being bashed out in that board, at that discussion, if there are potential issues that may come up with something that needs to come into council, they could be dealt with in that room and not come through that process, which could be difficult. And also, I think by having that very merged, very blended makeup of some people who are just focused on the company, some people who've got that shared responsibility about the company and the council, some people who do have that important link, actually, I think, between the electors and this company, which is supposed to do work for the people who elect us. I think that's a really potentially strong model. I'm not going to suggest that we need to go to that full all 7 people appointed by the end of the year, but I think if we can take steps towards that, it's going to mean that the balance of the people in that room is going to be the best possible balance for decision making in that company. And secondly, it's going to avoid groupthink, because you've got people coming at things from different angles, and you've got people from different backgrounds, people with different, and that idea of having a diversity of views as well as a diversity of opinions in there can only be good for decision making. And so I think it's right that we're dealing with it now rather than let it become a problem later down the line. And in terms of, you know, giving the cabinet views to take away, that would certainly be my opinion of I think, a potentially strong model to move ahead with. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Yeah, can I ask if you might ruminate on that one? Not now,
Well, I can ruminate on it. I don't share Councillor Robertson's enthusiasm for that model, but I can certainly take it away and ruminate on it. I think avoiding groupthink is always a good thing, absolutely a good thing. And I think building in diversity of thought and diversity of experience and all those sorts of diversity is important because it helps build resilience into any system that you're creating. I think there's a fine line between avoiding groupthink, but then allowing the LATCO sufficient latitude to create a mind of its own, which then divorces it from the will of the council. And I think that's my main concern, that I think a LATCO is really important because it allows us to respond in a really agile way without having to come through some of the governance processes that full council requires. But it also allows us to retain a fairly tight grip on what it's actually doing. And perhaps some of this is coming from my hesitance and from my nervousness about actually recognising a LATCO is really good. It's not something we've done before. And I suppose it is a gradual process of slowly letting go and almost watching your child with stabilisers and wondering at what point do you want to take those stabilisers off. Some of my kids probably never take them off, but yeah, I suppose it's just that ability to grow as we develop and actually recognise that what we don't want to do is go full bore, chugging in the LATCO, let's get loads of independent directors on, and all of a sudden we might find that company with zero, we lose all element of control over it, and it's doing things that perhaps we wouldn't agree with, but we don't have any real way of stopping. So I take it on board. I think it's just managing that tension.
I think it's worth reviewing the LATCO at some point in the future, with Scrutiny can have a look at it and then give that feedback to you.
Yeah, absolutely. What I fully expect is that once internal audit conclude their report into the governance of it, that report comes back, whilst it will clearly go to audit committee, Councillor Ho, that actually perhaps it comes back here as well for a look at, well, actually combined with any recommendations that they come up with.
Yes.
I can see that red dial just hanging there. Now, let's hope it's in green, and let's hope that it's an in-depth positive review. But if there are recommendations there from our internal audit team, I'd fully expect those come through here. Perhaps augment those with any suggestions from this committee, and that we build on that going forward.
Thank you. Councillor Woodward then, the reason for calling was because there wasn't a consultation and the new political landscape, and the leaders referred to accepted that, I think, really. Is there anything else you want to say? There's no proposal to actually reject this or say take it back, is there?
No, but I think this discussion has been useful. And I do think councillor Pullen's commitment to ruminate on the way forward is a helpful one. And you know, I'm sure that will be in conjunction with councillor Smith as well. But you know, my intention in calling this in was to have this sort of debate about, you know, where are we going to go in the future. And I absolutely agree with the formation of the LATCO. It's been successful so far, and long may that continue. But just, you know, that sort of that link which you've reinforced really between the council and the LATCO, I think is really important. And it is a very different council now from what it was before now. So I hope councillor Pullen's taken my comments on board.
I've heard that. I cannot forget those words, councillor.
So basically, the leaders heard what the caller Inner has said. Both are satisfied. There's been some listening and good ideas again from Councillor Robertson. I would say we can produce a matrix for that. I don't know, but I think that's it really. So read those views. Thank you for your time coming in here. I know you got the other event that was going on.
Thank you.
There you are. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you everybody. I now believe we'll be looking at the finances of the council. So if you'd like to both come down to the in there, please, yeah. So I'll say the witness box. Can't be second, don't worry. It's not that sort of scrutiny we do.
Well, hopefully not. Hopefully nobody's going to find themselves in a criminal court at least.
No. What I've done before is earlier on, but actually people could actually just briefly introduce themselves, because I'm thinking of the new members. It's a mistake I made at the first meeting where I'm assuming, oh yeah, of course you don't all know. So just very briefly, and then we'll move on to that.
Certainly. Well, I am Councillor Rob Strachan, the ward councillor for Longdon Ward, but I also hold the portfolio for finance and commissioning, so I hold responsibility politically for the financial position of the council. And to my left is
Anthony Thomas. There's probably various names, titles, but I am
the number.
Assistant Director Finance and Commissioning. I am the statutory section 151 officer, but for anybody that's listening and watching, I'm the finance director in all intents and purposes.
Yes, thank you. I think what counts as something is we're going to say I'll forget now. I'll remember it later on. So that's it. So we've got the report here. It's always a lot of pages, but it's always clearly written. I'll just say one thing: as the chart with little dots on that I didn't understand, but perhaps when you go through, I'm going to go through this. I won't say page by page, but section by section. But did you want to say anything first of all, Councillor?
If I could open in summary, and I know that Anthony may want to add to that opening. This is, of course, the first time that the emergent medium-term financial strategy finds itself before this committee. You'll note that it is governed by a guiding set of budget principles, which are very prudent and which have served us very well since 2019, and that this authority still finds itself in a broadly resilient financial position. You will also note from the report, though, in terms of scene setting, that the ongoing financial uncertainty in the local government sector is making budgeting in a multi-year environment very challenging. And we certainly expect our situation as a shire district to become considerably more challenging after the finance reform, whenever that may take place. Because while we may have lobbied ministers and been told probably not in this parliament, nobody really knows when that's going to be. And so it's not something that necessarily helps us in terms of long-term financial planning, and certainly not over the life of this medium-term financial strategy. Because this is the first time it comes before overview and scrutiny, I'm here far more to listen than I am to talk. And there are some things which obviously I'm going to be placing before you tonight, which I'm really keen to hear the committee's views on, those being the capital budget, the revenue budget, and whether you have any views at this stage about our positions on council tax, although I'm not necessarily going to be drawn in any great deal on that. I saw the wink, Councillor Woodward. Not necessarily going to be drawn on that in any great deal tonight, and it may well be something that that we have a constructive discussion on, but that I make no firm commitments at this stage. In terms of local taxation, it is of course a significant sector of our income here as a council. Can I also pay tribute here to Nikki Begley and members of our finance team, because once again, you'll see in the supporting documents, our collection rates of both non-domestic rates and council tax are extremely high in this authority. But there are also recent initiatives taken by this council on my watch that make it absolutely plain that where there is financial distress being suffered by households, we will do everything we can to ameliorate those via a robust and newly designed council tax support scheme, which I look forward to seeing the success of over the forthcoming financial year. There are also a couple of quick themes that I'd like to address right from the start, because I'm sure they'll be exercising the minds of members of the committee. And the first is the use of a higher than expected level of reserves to balance the budget at this stage. I will say at the very outset, I do not believe that is a sustainable position, and it's a view that's shared by the Finance Director sitting to my left. A large proportion of our recent financial pressures are inflationary and are being suffered by a number of authorities across the country, and I'm not going to draw any more attention than is necessary to recent authority failures, although I hope that they are not going to be joined by a torrent of other authorities, because that hurts the whole sector. There is also, though, some delay to proposals that relate to additional income and proposals that relate to cost savings, and those are being considered, I'm aware, by the leadership team as a matter of some urgency, because it's the view taken by finances that it's not sustainable to carry on eating losses like that and eroding the reserves, simply because we need them to do bigger and better things, and once we've spent them, they have gone. As I say, I'm placing before you the capital programme. Nothing goes into this until it is costed, agreed to, and pretty much ready to go, which is why it's normally very much front loaded in early years, and there's very little in subsequent years. I see no strong reason to depart from that, but if members have proposals within both the capital and revenue budgets that they wish to draw to my attention tonight and to Anthony's, then I'm sure we will, of course, listen. And as I say, you have a number of different options for our approach to council taxation when we actually come to make that decision come February, March, and those options are scoped out with costings later in the report. I don't know whether Anthony wishes to add anything at this stage. Obviously, I'm sure there will be questions, and if there's things that you need us to deal with, then we will do.
So just a couple of other points. So one of the things I've been conscious of in writing the report is there's a lot of new members both on the committee and in the council. So there's a little bit more information in this version of the report, giving us the first report to the committee to help build members' understanding of the financial position, some of the key assumptions. We give the perennial update on local government finance reform, and I've put a little bit in there about the new Office for Local Government, OFLOG as it's known, and the metrics that they're providing. And we've included local taxation information this time with benchmarking in there, because I think that is important in terms of the budget, but I think it paints quite a positive picture in most cases, the benchmarking. And the final thing I was going to say was the council tax base that is used in the report at the moment will be reviewed once we submit what's known as a council tax base return in October, and that'll be subject to approval by Cabinet in December this year.
Could you say a little bit about benchmark? I understand, but especially for new members, why we're comparing ourselves with these particular, the council miles away or not next door, just to make it clear for that.
So in the benchmarking, we've given two sets of information. So there are what's known as nearest neighbours, and that's not nearest geographical terms, that's nearest in statistical and profile terms. So there will be councils that don't own housing stock, for instance. There may be councils on low levels of debt that will have similar demographics. So you're comparing apples with apples versus apples with pears. The other group that we provide is the population of all district councils, so you can get an idea of not just the 10 or 11 council news names, but you get a view as to the whole of the district council sector. So both of those are valid comparisons, but the nearest names give a better like-for-like comparison.
Thank you. Thanks. Now, having said I'm going to go through page by page, only to say, assume that you've already got any questions and you know where it's going to be. So I'll go through page by page that way. Page 24 is the first one, the background there. And on page 25, that 3.16 paragraph, which is the funding gap, is currently projected to be 1.6 million. So, and the first call for any additional resources must be to balance the budget and to negate the use of general reserves. What are the options have we got for reducing the funding gap? Can you spell those out? Even if you said council tax 10%, that'll solve it. We can't do that. It's 2% still.
Yeah, we can't do that, and even if we could, I don't think I'd want to anything to like that scale. There's a suite of options available to us, and local taxation is just one of them. But I think first and foremost is making sure that any additional waste that we have here within the council is eliminated, and I don't mean the portfolio because council work is behind me. But where we're not doing things quite as well as we could be, we're eliminating that. And the cost savings that we have coming forward and the additional income proposals that we have coming forward are actually delivered robustly, appropriately, and at the right time. They have been delayed, and it may well be that in some of them, the opportunity to deliver those is not quite at the right time. For instance, I recently heard there was a proposal to bring in increases to car parking in late November, and of course this authority is never going to start doing that just in time for Christmas, when we'd like people to come to the city centre and start Christmas shopping if they have the same level of organisation as I do and do anything on Christmas Eve. And so that's one potential route. Others are opportunity led. Members will have noticed in this that perhaps perversely, with every successive year's delay to significant financial reform, this authority is actually considerably better off, and a lot of that is related to business rate retention, and the fact that every time that goes a little bit further down the line, we're allowed to keep about £1 million a year of additional business rates that would otherwise be swept off to other authorities or indeed to Westminster. And so it may well be that we as a Shire district join our fellow districts and lobby against that sort of funding reform, and it's something that we have engaged in doing by the District Council network previously. And I know that Councillor Wilcox continues to do via his work in the Local Government Association. And so that's another potential strut. That's the other that you want to put in on your.
Now, I suppose the key point is the one Councillor Strachan's made there. The assumption behind that funding gap is that local government finance reform takes place 1st of April 25. That is what the government's policy is at the moment. I think there's a lot of doubt about the timing of that because of the general election and what form a new government takes, and whether local government finance reform is even a priority for a new government in the first year. The other point I'd probably make as well is that the modelling we use a couple of experts to provide the modelling behind this, is based on policy papers from pre-pandemic times. At that point in time, the government was talking about a simplified funding model based predominantly on population numbers. And latterly, with the pandemic, I think with inflation and demand, I think the subjective deprivations come back on the agenda. So it may be that that's revisited in part of the reforms, and therefore what I'm trying to say here is the modelling is based on policy decisions from several years ago. That may influence the outcome of a reform in any case. So it may be worse now, it could be a lot better than that. And that's the problem that Councillor Strachan was talking about earlier, in that it's very difficult to plan future year finances and that level of uncertainty.
Yeah, this is a recurring theme, isn't it? The uncertainty and what the government might do. Well, if I can carry on then, local taxation is the next section, which is page 26. Any questions on that section page? No. And over the page 27. And further down 3.3, well, 330, there's the shortfall of £176,000 in general reserves, and then 332, the shortfall there again. Page 28, any questions with the pie charts? Page 29. And then you've got just mentioned there the planning application, national changes there on the bottom of that page. And above the car parking and the garden waste that bring in extra income. No. Page 30. The level of uncertainty. What about it? Yes.
I think my page is a number different from yours.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm assuming that it's.
3.41 is the top of my page.
Yeah, okay. Paragraph 3.44.
Okay.
That refers to specific sort of capital investment that's needed, but will require funding to be identified. So ICT vehicles, property plan maintenance, and so on. So there are unfunded at present, unfunded commitments both on the revenue and the capital budget, and there's not a lot of leeway within the budget to make sure that that's happening. I'm conscious of the fact that the withdrawal of the local plan, for example, is expected to cost the council £600,000 in round figures. That was the report to cabinet. So, you know, there are lots of additional pressures. So there isn't a great deal of sort of manoeuvring in terms of further projects. Perhaps I'll come on later on to consultation, because Councillor Strachan said, you know, if there are any alternative ways of spending the resources that we've got and alternative suggestions, then they'll be considered. And I want to know by the end of the discussion how those can go forward, because one of the concerns that certainly my political group expressed prior to the elections and since is the inequity of funding, and particularly capital funding across the district, where a lot of resources are put into some areas and minimal resources into others. If you remember, Councillor Booker asked a question at full council about the capital spend per ward, and Whittington and Street Out had something like £40,000 spent in that particular ward over the last 10 years, which, you know, I'm sure Councillor Holland will be arguing should be increased, but you know, that it's the mechanisms by which we can sort of put forward suggestions, which I know mean that, you know, if the suggestion is put forward for funding X projects by £50,000, that £50,000 has got to be found from somewhere else. So those sorts of negotiations and balances and the process by which we can make those make a case for those sorts of projects to be considered. Thanks,
Okay.
Chair.
Do you want to come back on that particularly? Or?
Other than the broad theme, I didn't detect a question within that, Councillor Woodward, but I think that is
I
definitely
think she
very.
said, do you agree under a breath?
I think it's very much a call for collegiality, and it's a call that I heard at the annual council meeting, and one that I was attracted to, because in the situation that we are in, we must be collegiate as a executive arm of the authority. And I think it's incumbent on me as a finance cabinet member to listen to my colleagues from all parts of the chamber for any suggestions, and to take those forward if it's appropriate so to do for assessment by officers who of course are the experts in this. I was very much effectively pinned to the wall by Councillor Booker's question at that full council. It was extremely well put. Artfully engineered and brought out some figures that were quite alarming for me as cabinet member to see just how little had been invested in elements of the district over the previous 11 years. But I think what that brought to the fore is also elements of opportunity-led investment that just hasn't existed in those areas, and that might be just because we haven't been looking for those opportunities quite as well as we could have been. And I think there's probably scope for a conversation in the future. And I certainly look to my Labour colleagues to identify things that they have thought of over the previous years in opposition and may think of in collegiate relationship going forwards.
You have laid that gauntlet down a few times now, so yeah, thank you very much. Councillor Miles Trent, have a question.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just jumping back to the previous page, I think 3.39. Just had a quick question about car parking, because I'm new in these parts. I was wondering whether we've recovered back to pre-pandemic levels on that revenue stream, or whether there's still a way to go.
No, we haven't. We're still short by a significant portion. It may well be that subsequent phasings in the way that our car parking charges are looked at and the way that our car parks are operated may yield a return that takes us to above pre-pandemic levels, but certainly demand is currently still below pre-pandemic.
Okay, thank you. Next page I've got is page 31, and it's the MTFS revenue budget, general reserves and total reserves. And I'll just quote from later in the report on Appendix B, which is that council will maintain an overall, these are the budget principles, council will maintain an overall level of revenue reserves that are appropriate for the overall level of risks that the organisation faces in order to overcome any foreseeable financial impact. Councillor Strachan, I think, wasn't particular that actually referred to the problems we have with that, and that is a principle that we need to adhere to, and the difficulties is how we actually do square the circle, it seems to me. Are there any questions on that first page? Starts off at 3.48. Councillor Smith there, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. Just to help those who are following on screens, can I ask that instead of saying page number, you lead with the first paragraph on each page?
Stick you with this in the minutes. It will be.
It'll just help. I think the concern that I've got in here is around the more pessimistic scenario, and the idea of us being £454,000 short, potentially in 26, 27. I'm just hoping I can get a bit of a steer in terms of what we've used to say what effectively how we come up with what that pessimistic scenario is, what that optimistic scenario is, and I'd really like that optimistic scenario to come true.
Well, with my chief risk assessor sitting to my left, I'm going to invite him to respond with what is actually included in those scenarios.
So it's quite an extreme scenario. It's very low growth in the council tax base. So that would be the numbers from the local plan projections at, I think it's 50% risk level. It is no council tax increases in the period of the MTFS. It involves the implementation of finance reform in 25-26 at one of its more extreme levels. So we would get the government set baseline and keep none of the business rate growth, and there would be no transitional arrangements for that implementation. And we would lose new homes bonus and most of the other grant streams. That is a very extreme example, but
the worst case scenario.
Well, not quite.
No, it's not. You're right.
It's not far off it, but it's. I suppose what I'm trying to.
There's something worse than that.
There is, because I suppose the government could even cut the baseline level further, so you keep less of the business rates than the baseline. I suppose what I've tried to illustrate is the range of outcomes, so you get some idea of the uncertainty levels here. So in that particular case, you get a swing of 6.2 million between the optimistic and the pessimistic. It gets bigger the further you go on. I mean, up to 9.6 million in 27, 28. And I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just trying to give an illustration of the level of uncertainty we're dealing with here.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, I think it reinforces the point I made earlier that when your disaster graph has a £9.5 million cone at the end of it, that shows you just how little we know about what it's going to look like in the future, and just how impossible it is to accurately forecast the horrific split infinity, to forecast accurately where we're going to go.
Okay. Yeah, that part at the moment. Yeah, thanks. Next page is starts with 3.55, which is page 32 in mine. And then page 33 is the alternative. Well, there we get the alternative options, the consultation. So I think Sue may want to come in here on the consultation. I should point out that the consultation is statutory, as you can see here, and how you go about it. Can I just ask one question though, which is that I know another authority, it's not cheap, but to have actually a proper sample of representative sample of the population. So you have a small group of people picked out as a proper representative sample by experts, and then interview them or have them over a period of half a day or something. And I mentioned this before some years ago. I remember we didn't think why we didn't do that, but that's something we could do, couldn't we? Instead of this, allegedly better, wider consultation on the internet and so on. I don't just wonder if you thought about those things, but probably soon if that's okay.
Yeah, we have, and we're very aware that focus groups, if I can
That's the phrase I was after.
if I can very loosely use that phrase, tend to be self-selecting and tend to be from quite a small demographic and actually don't necessarily give us a true picture. While
Sorry to interrupt. I was talking about it's a focus group picked out by a proper organisation, not us, or self-selecting, but by a polling organisation.
that's a possible route, but I wonder whether a broader brush approach, we're using various different methods of communication and consultation with people, may have a chance of yielding a better qualitative result, even if it doesn't necessarily give us the quantitative result that we've looked to. I would say that the approach that was taken last year did yield a significant uptick in people who actually engaged with the consultation, and in particular the sliders that were used on the consultation part of the website that allowed residents to choose what they may commit more or less funding to and what may be the implications of those decisions, did seem to yield some quite interesting results in the number of people who'd had a go. And I certainly encourage anybody who's watching to have a go at balancing our budget and playing with those sliders, because it was quite interesting to see what may have to go if you reduce funding in certain sectors, but equally what the opportunities may be if you increase funding in certain sectors. So certainly I look forward to that going live. I don't think that's going to go live date on that, but certainly I look forward to seeing that come forward.
I did have an issue last time as well about the sliders and that, which is that not all the questions were in there. The choices were limited. I'll have to look at my notes to see what other options were there as well. I'm sure I actually remember it, but it's too shy to tell me. But,
So I did take a note of comments in the committee last time. I think your questions were that they were very heavily expenditure focused and didn't about fees and charge options in there.
Okay.
I think the committee also.
Actually, I couldn't remember myself, but you reminded me. Fees and
Well,
charges.
the reason I remember is
forgotten
because I've been feeding it into this process this time. So
Thank you.
we have included fees and charges options in there this time. I think the other information the committee wanted was a wider demographic or response picture, so that we could understand whether it was focused in particular areas or particular demographics. So we've asked Tracy Cross to try and expand that equalities type consultation respondents information to hopefully reflect the wishes of the committee.
Thank you. That's good to hear. Thank you for that. Thank you. So, try to keep it right.
Yes, it's just on the consultations that I want to try to pin Councillor Strachan down. When specifically can Councillor Holland and his two colleagues in Whittington and Streetheigh, or me and my fellow Chase Terrace councillor, when can we put forward suggestions, and what will be the process then for projects to be funded? How will that happen? Because I'm conscious of the fact that if we put forward projects with some expenditure, the expenditure's got to be found from elsewhere. So I'm not quite sure how that will work in terms of process. Can I also just say, yeah, I'm glad to hear what Anthony just said about trying to get some balance across the geography and the demography locally. I was slightly concerned where it says a series of engagement events hosted by cabinet members and council officers with stakeholder audience groups to discuss specific themes. I'm not quite sure who chooses the stakeholder audience groups and how they're chosen, because some groups shout a lot more loudly than others, and I'd just like assurances that the quieter voices are heard as well.
Well, in terms of the second question first, the dealing with the stakeholder audiences, I'm going to leave that one to Anthony to talk through, if he actually is aware of who that will be selected by. I think that Tracy and we will be leading that on comms, but I'm not entirely sure he's in there. In terms of proposing projects coming forward, all I'd say to Councillor Woodward and indeed to any member is come and talk to me. I'll listen to absolutely anything. I'm not going to suggest that we place this on any sort of formal basis, but any member of leadership team, any member of cabinet, we all have email addresses, we all have phone numbers. And if you ring me during court hours, I'm not going to answer the phone. But if you ring me in the evening, I will do my level best to. So please do come and talk to us.
We will.
I'm sure you will, Sue, and I look forward to it. Because I think that's how we're going to build this going forward in a no overall control situation. I think it's important that we all talk to each other. And I think that's something that will hopefully yield good results for the residents of the whole district going forward.
So just on the composition, to be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. So what I will need to do is go back to Tracy and get a response for the committee.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dave, yes, Deborah, that's what.
Thank you, Chair. And just before I jump into consultation, and when we're done with this, we'll go back to the council tax proposals. I did put my hand up, you didn't see me.
No, it was
the
always draw
cabinet
my
member
attention
and
to, if I
section
don't- if I
151
don't
officer
see it, draw
specifically
my
asked.
attention to that fact, and I'll make sure that you are up to speed.
Um,
Carry on.
Thank you, Chair. So on the consultation, I know one of the things that was also mentioned last year when we discussed the consultation was around the the qualitative descriptions that went with when people moved the sliders. It was a case of when you moved it there, you got one. This is this is how we'll save that. And I think one of the committee members, fat guy, rubbish beard, mentioned that it would have been better to maybe put a couple of bullet points in there to say this could be met by doing X, Y, or Z, and put a few options there, as opposed to if you want to spend this much money, this is how much you're going to lose. So there was just that I wanted to just put on record again. And then secondly, around the stakeholder groups, I think it's actually really important that we feed back into that comms team. I know last year when we got the response came through, it said, as it always does, not enough response from younger people, not enough response from people from the minorities, not enough response from people from lower income brackets. If we're going to be doing that piece of work, and we can identify 6 weeks out that we haven't got enough responses from young people, find a way to go and speak to some young people. We have five or six secondary schools in the district. A lot of them have sixth forms, new one opening in September. That might be a place to start. There are also other places as well, but I think if we're going to do that, make sure we're targeting it so we do get a more representative sample.
Yeah, completely agree on the second half of that, Councillor Robertson, and I think it's probably a good idea to take forward, and we'll have a conversation with the communications team. If they haven't already had the idea, then we'll make sure they have it now. On the structure of the slider responses, or what's triggered when you place a slider at a certain point, I'll turn to the left of the man who's writing them.
I think there are some limitations over what we can do with the tool, but certainly on the fees and charges, we tried to provide some bulleted responses for people to understand. So one of the options might be, instead of reducing expenditure, that you marginally increase fees and charges, or it then moves to materially significantly. There may be options around attracting sponsorship or commercial income, those type of things. I will confess that I think this is an iterative process that I think we started last year, we built on it this year, and I think as long as we keep building and learning the lessons from it, we should get better by 2 or 3 years. That would be my view. I don't think it'll be perfect this year, I'll be honest, but I think we've moved some way based on the comments last year to improve it.
Thank you. But come back to the council tax after the appendices, actually, only because that's the asking for our views on that. So if that's okay, I'll go through this quickly. If there are any questions on Appendix A, which is the financial planning timetable, is there any questions on that one first of all? If not, the next appendix B is the principles. I referred to that a little earlier. Dave, please, yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sure both of the people to my right will be quite happy. I'm not planning on line by line in this tonight. You'll get that later in the year. Just in terms of the assumptions that are there, though, there's a couple of assumptions that I want to check here. We're currently looking and assuming a 2% pay award next year. I don't think that is a good assumption with inflation at 7.8%, and private sector pay just about reaching that. I don't think the public sector pay will. I don't think that they will be able to continue to restrain that at 2%. And given that staffing is 48% of our revenue expenditure, I did a quick back of the envelope saying that if that is 5%, not 3%, it's 585k over 3 years. So that's really significant. So I think in terms of moving ahead with the budget, I think we need to be very careful that we've got a very competent assumption in terms of pay awards. The other one is we note in the cost pressure section that we've got an additional 695 additional residential properties that is also included in the tax base, but no budget for new homes bonus within that. And whether we think it's appropriate to continue to not budget any new homes bonus, because that could be capital spend, which is then investing in some of the projects that Councillor Wood was talking about. And similarly, there's no increase in the number of commercial properties, which I thought we had a strategic plan to build a load outside. So whether that, and I know there's going to be an occupancy issue with that, or whether that's appropriate. And then the final one on assumptions. I think the assumption for fuel is low on the basis of what I've read, but simultaneously the assumption for inflation on gas and electricity is high. I think everything that I've read has said that's likely to be deflationary this year as opposed to inflationary of around 5%. But we also know that fuel is a bigger cost for us than gas and electricity, and I think the assumption we've got in there is definitely on the low side.
Okay, so your observation on pay is a well-founded one, and the modelling we are doing to take this forward assumes a 4% increase next year. So we've doubled the increase. That may still be too low, but we're modelling at a higher level than that. And just on the number you calculated, it probably is on the high side because we recharge quite a big element of the pay to Tamworth for the joint waste service, so it reduces. And the other one that reduces it is building control, because they're able to recover it from fees and charges because it's a budget neutral entity. So you're right on your point with the pay, and that will be developed as we move through in the versions of the MTFS. The point you make around residential properties on 695, I suppose this is one of the issues around the level of uncertainty in the local finance. I think new homes bonus is one of the areas that is probably the most vulnerable from any type of reform. We've got a commitment really only for this year for new homes bonus. The government had mentioned there was going to be a consultation this year on its content in the future, which has never appeared. I suspect that means, again, in our modelling, that there will be new homes bonus for next financial year. But beyond that, I think we're at the whim then of wider local finance reform, and I think it is probably one of the more vulnerable aspects of local funding stream, because if you look at when it started in 11-12, you used to get, I think it's 5 years, no baseline. So you used to get every house you built, you got a reward. That has been reduced over the period now that we get a single year and it has to be above a baseline level. So I think the government have indicated they do not believe it's achieved policy objectives they set it. So I do think it's very vulnerable, but that may change with a different complexion. The commercial properties increase, I take your point on that one, but whereas with residential property, we've got quite a good forward projection through the local plan. Commercial property is a lot more difficult, and we don't tend to build that in until we're aware it's on the ground. And the local taxation information provided earlier, you could probably see we've got almost a flat line of rateable value from 2018-19 up to 22-23, which means despite the fact we build, maybe have more properties, it's not impacting the rateable value. So the business rate isn't necessarily changing, and there could be a number of reasons for that. So things like businesses appealing and getting the rateable value reduced successfully. The other one that is a thorn in our side is where the government decides to move rateable value premises from our local list, so we no longer build for it, and collect it centrally. So if it's classed as national infrastructure, which we've got a Virgin Media that moved, we lose the business rates from that site. Other parts of the business rate system are reduced to compensate for that, but what I'm trying to illustrate here is the numbers are one thing, but there are other factors that play into the business out projections. And take your point on fuel, we can go away and have a look at that one. And again, on the gas and electricity, I take your point on that one. I suppose whilst we put individual factors here, it gives me confidence if we're correcting the round in totality when we're dealing with inflation. So if there are ups and downs, as long as I get a number I'm comfortable with, then the individual factors in it are not quite as important.
I think just to add to that, I completely support Anthony in terms of the appropriateness of not budgeting for new home bonus, given the inherent uncertainty around it. And we have seen other authorities around the country who've had their fingers burned by building that into base budget, and then the changes have made it very difficult. The timing of delivery and occupation of commercial property is, again, as you've heard, one of the main reasons why it's not built in. I think it would risk misleading this committee and indeed the council if we built that in and said the sky looks beautiful, clean and rosy, and then all the commercial properties are not delivered or not occupied, but we then are never able to build for them. And in fact, the financial picture is far more stark than it looks. So I certainly endorse the prudent approach taken by Anthony and his assumption, and that is why they are as they are.
I wonder, could you just ask you, Anthony, if you could say a little bit more about this losing a business rate? What do you say? It was a national. Yeah, say a bit more about that.
So most business rate premises sit on what's known as a local list, so they sit on our list and we bill for them. There are some sectors that are classed as national infrastructure. So British Telecommunications was one of those. Network Rail is another one. And the thinking behind it is that their assets sit across multiple local authority areas, and it's more efficient if they're billed centrally by the government for all of their assets, and then that money is redistributed out amongst local government in some form. Virgin, that hasn't kept pace with changes in the business environment. So Virgin Media were classed as on each individual local list. When the government have consulted on the approach to business rates, they've obviously put in their response that they should be treated the same way as British Telecommunications. And the government have accepted that, and therefore they've moved the rateable value from our list. We no longer bill them, and they put it centrally. It is redistributed in some form across local government, but so that we don't lose out, they will adjust other parts of the business rate system to compensate that loss. Yeah. But when you're looking purely at rateable value, it would look like our rateable value had dropped because we've lost that asset.
Right, thank you. Okay, thanks for that. Yeah. What about that one? Back to the appendices, then, if I may, that's Appendix B, that one. Thank you for your questions on there. There's the chart on the next one, Appendix C, of course. I didn't quite follow the dots really, and the green bits there, and but I won't dwell on those unless you want to help me.
I suppose I thought it was worthwhile putting this in because I think,
well, I can see it's clever, but
yeah, and I suppose there's a number of it because the government have produced this. It's part of their toolkit to start looking at identifying the authorities that they believe are under financial pressure or likely to get into difficulties. And I'll put your nearest neighbours, I'll put district council. I think my message with it is that we're the blue dot, and in the majority, if not all, we're within the median range, which is good in my opinion. It would be good if you're at the higher end as well. That's not necessarily a bad thing. I think it would be problematic if you're at the lower end. But I think what the government is looking for is more transparency around this, so that if we're particularly high or low, that we explain why we're high or low to the public, as well as being the tool for them to identify councils that potentially get into difficulty.
well, yeah, my issue with the little poor green crosses, which are in the lower section rather than those in the median section.
So the green cross actually is a comparator of South Staffs District Council. So
I mean, the total cost spending power, I think that's.
Yeah, and I suppose I put it in as a comparative because I think locally they're probably one of the nearest in terms of their demographics and location. I think their particular issue at South Staffs is for a long period they didn't levy council tax, and they've got a very low council tax level that they're trying to catch up. So they are well below median range because of those decisions they've taken historically, and the fact that there's a capping level means that they can't catch up, or it's very difficult for them to catch up. So that's why they're down at that lower level.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, you reminded me of that fact. That's it. All right. Okay. Thank you for that. Oh, sorry, Mark. Sorry.
Just a quick one. I was just going to speak up in defence of your graphs because you mentioned at the outset.
I just said they're wrong. I just said I didn't get them. You know.
No, you said they're absolutely wrong. Sorry, I misheard that. You mentioned at the beginning putting a lot of detail into this with one eye on newer members, and I found it really helpful to have the extra detail. So thank you.
Right, so it's the older members that don't get them. Yeah, the new members are okay. Okay. Right, thank you for that. Appendix C. There on the taxation information, council tax, changing the tax base and so on. With the dark blue bar. And then business rates over the next page, appendix C still. Any questions? And then appendix D, the approved revenue budget. Yeah, thank you, Catherine. Give me a chance to look up here.
Thank you, Chair. Just two hopefully quick ones on here. Just within that revenue budget, I can't remember. I think I've asked you this before and I cannot remember. Where are dividends from the LATCO captured in the 4 lines there? And then the second question, if you want to vote at the same time, there's a really significant drop in income from developing prosperity at the end of 24-25. That's 460 something thousand pounds. That's really significant when we're looking at the types of budget gaps that we are funding gaps. So yeah, if we can get that in the open, so have a look at that, that'd be great.
I'll have to check. I think dividends are part of the A Good Council line, so they will reduce the level of spend within there. Off the top of my head, it's around £100,000 we take. The developing prosperity one, the large drop of it to which years are you referring to?
So it's between 24, 25, 25, 26.
Yeah. I'll have to check that definitely, but I suspect part of that may well be cost pressures of some description, but I'll find that out and I'll come back to you on that.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Over the page then, I just want the issue there with the introduced a departure charge to all bus companies using Lichfield bus station. Has that been discussed elsewhere previously? I mean, it just seems a bit, you know, how would that work and what would the buses come here? Just briefly on that. I don't know about it, you see, but I might have missed it.
I've not seen that discussed at any meeting that I've been at, either public or indeed private, but I don't know whether there is a portfolio holder who may be in a position to assist you. I would imagine.
The leader of the council's got his hand up behind you, I think.
I might be able to assist on that. It's quite normal practice in other areas to charge the bus companies a departure fee, essentially for to recognise the fact that they are using the facilities that we provide as part of a series of bus stops like we have outside. It was probably a good 18 months ago or so that we realised that we weren't charging that at Lichfield District Council and haven't done for a very, very long time. And it was introduced as an idea.
His light on still.
Sorry.
Come on, Dave, sort it out. Right. So it was realised we weren't charging that. There was an opportunity for us to charge that. I think it was one of those ideas that was a very good idea at the time, but given future events that we have earmarked for that site, the level of work involved in introducing it and the level of receipt from it just weren't going to stack up. So it was one of those things that was shelved.
Could look at it again.
We could look at it again. Well, we could.
If normal practice is to charge.
Yeah, well, we could do. I think the reality is that if the plans for the Birmingham roadside come to fruition at the pace that we think they will, by the time we've got round the legalities and paperwork involved in introducing those charges, by the time we get all that signed off, we may very well be relocating the bus station. But of course, that that then gives us the opportunity to do that there. There is then a question of how that impacts on viability of bus journeys and all those sorts of impacts as well. So it's not as, I don't think we'd want to be as clear cut as, well, we'll introduce that charge and forget the impact. We know there's challenges with public transport and we wouldn't want to add to those challenges. So we can revisit it. I'd just urge caution.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair.
Just note as well, Chair, that the scale of headache for a return of £21,000 is likely to be not worth it in the long run.
But if it was a few £100 for a town council charging for using our bus shelters by the bus companies, that might be something we might look at in Burntwood and open the gates for you.
Good luck, Burntwood.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. I thought it was just me that missed that before. So. Okay, Appendix C, this could be a minefield, but I really don't want to go through all these charges and everything, but is there anything outstanding there that people desperately want to speak on?
Sorry, Chair, I just want to make one point here is the level of fees and charges increased because we've now got leisure centres in house, so that adds about 2.5 million per year to the budget, and that is an element of additional financial risk, both in terms of scale, but of the nature of the business that's involved there. So just to point that out to people.
So you should have spoke, Councillor Robertson.
Thank you, Chair. And just in terms of that, I thought the leisure centres were held under LWMTS, so any cost pressure should be absorbed by the company, not by us.
So the model that's being used for the leisure centre insourcing is the operational cost of managing and running the leisure centres sits under the LATCO. To remain what's known as TECL compliant, we need to have the income under the council, and we pay the company management fee. So that is why the fees and charges sit with the council, and the financial risk sits with the council in that situation. Although even if they were in the company, to be honest, the financial risk sits with the council. It's a wholly owned
the shareholder.
Yeah.
I love the UK tax code. I really do. Makes really simple things like that happen. Apologies to anybody listening.
Okay, the next page continues there, of course. So, Appendix F, the approved capital programme there. Thing there, and over that page there. So I come right back to the recommendation, which is the revenue budget and capital investment priorities. We've given our views and asked questions on that, and there's a few that Anthony Thomas will get back to us on. I appreciate that. But also the potential level of the district council tax increase. I know Councillor Robertson wanted to speak on this bit at this stage, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for going back to this. I think the big point that I wanted to raise on this is one of the things we've got modelled there is 2.99%. Have we had any indication from DLUC that they're going to let us do that?
This is because it's over the 2%.
So in the settlement last year, we got the settlement with numbers for 23-24 and what's known as a set of principles for 24-25. We didn't get numbers with those, but the indication was that council tax increases would likely remain at the 2.99 as they were setting 23-24. So I believe that is an option for 24-25, which will have to be confirmed with the settlement. Whether it continues beyond then is a matter for a future government, I believe.
Yeah, yes, please.
Thank you for that clarification, because I know it was one of the many discussions we had around this last year. I know that was one of the things around the uncertainty about how long 2.9 I'd be knocking around for. The main point I wanted to drive at, given the uncertainty around 2.9, is around the 5% increase. We are one of the district councils where a 2% increase for us is lower than the 5%. Sorry, the £5 limit. So in theory, we can breach the 2% because the way the legislation is written is it's 2% off. You can go to £5. Apologies if members knew that, but I'm aware there's a lot of new councillors around. One of the things I want to pull up on there is even if we did go for the 5% each year, it's still coming in at. Sorry. Oh, honestly, what £5. Apologies. Thank you for people picking me up. But even looking into that, that's going to be 2, 3, 4. It's going to be £500,000. So that on its own will not be what solves a 1.6. And I think it's quite important that we pull that out, particularly because the cost of living crisis isn't quite as white hot as it was this time last year, but it's still very real. We still know there's enormous numbers of our residents having to resort to food banks. We know there's people really genuinely struggling out there. We know that we're already looking into council tax support schemes and things like that, and as we should be. But I don't necessarily think that just dipping into the £5 increase is necessarily the best way forward, given some of the financial pressures that our residents face.
Okay, and the response from the cabinet member.
Yeah, I think that relying solely on council taxation, so personal taxation, as the only way to solve financial pressures of this authority is as lazy as it is disingenuous, and certainly not something that I'm looking to do. It is very much on the table that we may have to protect our position by an increase, but I'm very aware that that is a finely balanced debate that we will have to have as members from all different parties, and is something that I hope that I will weight correctly and can expect support from members of other parties on. It is certainly not something that I take lightly. I hope that my conduct in the last certainly 2 council tax debates shows that it's not something that I take lightly, and it's something that I think we will have to wait very carefully as the winter sets on and we see what situation we find ourselves in. I'm not, as I say, going to be drawn on any figures tonight. I don't think it's appropriate for me to sit here and say that in September, given that we don't have to make this decision until December, running into January. And indeed, that actual final resolution is at full council in, I believe, the 1st of March, or is it the end of February? I haven't got a calendar in front of me. So that's going to be something where I keep as many options as open as I possibly can for as long as I possibly can, and hope that we can have a constructive debate around it as we get close to that point. But certainly I'm happy to hear the views of members at this point as to what their initial gut feeling is on where we may be.
Well, the point I would make is certainly that property, well, not the property debates, but the reason debate will be at scrutiny, I think, where you make the arguments, hear the responses, and we have a rational debate on the budget, on the council tax and so on. Found in the council chamber, that's okay. I'm out of that bit now in a sense, unfortunately. That bit aren't the best really, but it's the scrutiny where we actually can give serious consideration to any figures that Anthony comes forward with, or the government take off him, or whatever. Okay, that's it. That's going to be the end of that. I think there's going to come in any plans, any ideas for you. Not at this stage, anyway. No, thank you. Thank you very much for that. I just point out that we did have the internal briefing paper from Anthony as well, that hopefully members will have read, and that is also a very useful document. So thank you for that, everybody. Thank you, both of you. Thank you. Let's got a small, short items now, but appreciate that. Thank you. So the next item is the work programme, actually, and a bit early to the 2 requests on topics. One is about bus travel, and also one that Sue had mentioned, which is the what was it? Forgotten again.
Local health priorities.
That's it. The local health priorities. And the question then we'll have, it's a decision for me and the vice chair to make actually, is whether we have a task group, or whether we've got to wait for the other task groups to finish now because of the capacity, which is added one, although it'll be 1 meeting, or whether we have a one-off report here. So we'll be considering that, and I'll certainly consult further so to see what would be involved in that, if that's okay, and then we can have a view, then a considered view of which way forward to that. It's got to be within our capacity as scrutiny officers and so on. But okay. Yes, please, Moss. Yes, thank you.
Can I just check my understanding on that? So we're saying that other task groups need to complete before the 2 proposed ones, or either of them could be taken on?
Yes, I mean, well, whether we need a task group, either of those 2 items, the first thing. The second one is, if we did say yes to a task group, we've got to be able to fit that in with the resources that we have, and are struggling for volunteers to fill the task groups that we've got. So obviously we need people to do to attend those task groups and do the work. So yeah, that's what I'm saying. But we'll get on to it. Okay, thank you. On the work programme, then you've got that in front of you. The next meeting, we'll be considering, well, there's two that are a bit delayed, the empty homes policy and the planning committee protocol. They're going to be in the December meeting. But the council community fund, to undertake a full review of the scheme, which was agreed when it was set up, that will be at the next meeting. Then the knife angel issues that I've raised personally, notes from task groups, we'll definitely have some for then. And then on the 14th of November is the medium term financial, that won't go away. The medium term financial strategy will always be with us. Are there any other issues that might be coming up? I think there probably will be.
The only thing that I just wanted to flag, Chair, was I'd heard a couple of members mention an October meeting. It's just to clarify that what was the 4th of October meeting was moved to November earlier in the year. So the next meeting isn't in October, it's on the 14th of November, just so no one turns up and there's no one else here.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I presume I still have to read out the exclusion of the press and public, even though I've read what it says. I can tell people, nobody will learn anything. No, but I'm not saying, because I know what the minutes say, and they don't say anything really. But anyway, at this point, can I say that as publicity would be prejudicial to the public interest by reason of the confidential nature of the business to be transacted, the public and press be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business, which would involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in the paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Well, thank you, Henry, and those who have attended. And I'll leave it for the signal to say that we're off air.